All right, welcome everybody to the Future Freedom. I'm your host, Scott Horton, and he is my perpetual guest here every Thursday night. It's Jacob Hornberger, founder and president of the Libertarian Future of Freedom Foundation. This is our show, The Future of Freedom. Hi, Jacob. Welcome.
Good to be back, Scott. Ready for another round.
Good, good. Very happy to have you here. I really like the way you write. I've been reading you for a long, long time here, and you got a lot of good stuff. I want to start with this one. What kind of society do you want, and how do you get it? And I want to start with just the first part, because you describe what seems like, ought to be just whatever would be the rote answer for any normal human being. Peace and security and prosperity and freedom, right? Or who could argue with that? That's what everybody wants. And yet, the more I was reading your article, the more it was, really dawning on me what I already knew, but it's really hitting me hard that this is not what people want. This is what people say, but it's, freedom itself. I think, is that you that I read so much I can't keep it all straight? I think you even say yourself, it's freedom itself that is. Oh no, it's Jeffrey Tucker's article that you linked to in your other piece, that it just terrifies people. The idea that somebody else is doing something, the first thing they think is they're going to do something to harm me. Everybody's entire will must be, completely layered in prior restraint, or else what might happen? And that's left, right, and everybody who's just not political. They think an opinion means something that the government ought to make someone do. Otherwise, what's the point of having an opinion if it's not what you think the government should make people, how you think the government should make people behave? And so I wonder, what to do about that. I mean, obviously, you've got your foundation, you do your writing, you bring together these great libertarian minds. Politically speaking, we're stuck with Rand Paul at best. So we're basically doomed there, certainly on the national level. What's the libertarian to do to try to make a more libertarian society when our countrymen just don't agree with us? They really just don't.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. It goes really to methodology. Do we have a chance? Is it possible to achieve the free society rightly understood? And I say yes. The answer is yes to all of those. And the reason that I raised that question in the article you're referring to is that I think it's time for people to sit back and reflect, regular people. I mean, libertarians already know that we want a society of peace, prosperity, harmony, freedom. But I think it's important for people, non-libertarians, to reflect really deeply, what kind of society do you want? Because, I mean, look at the kind of society we're living in. We're living in a very violent society. I don't think anybody can deny that. You've got government killing people on a daily basis, especially in the Middle East. You've got a huge welfare state that gobbles up an enormous amount of productive capital. You've got everybody trying to get into everybody else's pocketbook, but every April 15th trying to take as many deductions and tax credits to protect his own money from being plundered and looted. You've got a drug addiction problem that clearly is serious enough to manifest a continuation of the war on drugs. So, this is really not the kind of society that people deep down, I think, really want. It's not a free society by any means. It's not a harmonious, peaceful, prosperous society. It's a very violent, kind of a police state, welfare, warfare state society. Now, we libertarians, so we challenge people then, like, what kind of society do you want? And then once you decide you want that kind of society, well, is it possible to achieve? Because you put it well. A lot of people say, I want to be taken care of by the government. I want the government to manage my life. I want the government to handle all the resources in the country and redistribute them. I want the government to keep me safe with a giant military establishment, overseas military bases, killing, bombing people on an indefinite basis. Well, so then how do we prevail? Well, I've come to the conclusion that the secret to this is just to reach a critical mass of people who want the genuine free society. This is the way you change corporations. You keep working to influence changes in mindset in corporations. You reach a critical mass of those people, And that could be less than a majority. It could be like 20%, 25%, and the whole corporation then just shifts. That's what can happen with a monumental change in society. You keep building up this tiny minority of the purists, the people that really want freedom, and then the society shifts. You can't predict how it's going to shift. All you know is that here is the prerequisite for shifting. You've got to reach that critical mass. So I don't really concern myself with the fact that the Hillary Clintons and the Donald Trumps of the world don't buy into libertarianism. We don't have to convince them. We have to just keep finding the people that keep building our particular critical mass, and then things are going to shift. A good example of this phenomenon is the drug war. I mean, we're getting very close to bringing this thing down. I think we're closer than we've ever been. I mean, you can hardly open up a newspaper or the internet without seeing an op-ed saying legalize drugs. But notice that none of the presidential candidates are talking about it. It's certainly not being brought up in the debates. But gradually, this thing's going to reach a tsunami level with this critical mass of people that I think is going to cause them to legalize drugs even if they don't want to.
Yeah. Well, on behalf of everyone, we certainly excuse you for not watching the entire Republican debate last night, Jacob, but it actually did come up. They had quite a discussion. They had quite a discussion of the war on drugs, and virtually all of them who said anything about it agreed that fighting a war against it was a failed endeavor. I forgot exactly whose quote it was, but it wasn't Rand. I think it was it may have even been Christie who said the drug war has failed, or some kind of very declarative statement, admission like that. They had a real back and forth about medical pot, especially, but Rand made it about the 10th Amendment and the right of the states to, it was a fight over what Christie had said, that if he was the president, he would use federal law to prosecute pot smokers in Colorado, whether the state law said it was okay or not. So that was the context of it. But what came out of it, and I was actually going to ask you about this tonight, or whether you had seen that, what you thought of it, was it seems like, I mean, and we're not talking about a Democratic Party primary debate, which I don't know if this has ever happened at a Democratic Party one either, but maybe people would expect that first. But we're talking about a Republican Party debate where, and Carly Fiorina actually said one of her children had died from drug addiction. I don't know the details of that, but maybe a heroin overdose or some kind of thing like that. And so she made it real personal, but then even she said, yeah, no, it's got to be all about treatment and this and that. So they weren't really addressing legalizing the drug trade and the drug business, which is the cause of all the criminality and all that kind of thing. But they were, and see, Rand started picking on Jeb and saying, yeah, you admit that you smoked pot, but you're a rich boy of privilege, and so you didn't have to worry about going to jail. But guess what? Poor people do go to jail just for having a little bit of weed, just like you did. And it ain't right, and that kind of thing. So even though he was only half-ass okay on when it came to the Iraq war, and we can get back to that maybe if you need to, but when it came to the war on drugs, it was a pretty good deal. And in the wash, the consensus was shrug. Basically, we have to admit that this is a government program that has just not succeeded. Now, translating that into abolishing the DEA and legalizing, the corporate takeover of drug production and that kind of thing, we're still a ways off from that. But more or less, they're out of arguments. No one dared say, all we need is just to hire 10,000 more drug cops to lock all the last junkies in America away, and that'll solve it, or anything. Fiorina even talked about how we incarcerate more than any other nation on the planet, a higher rate of incarceration than any other nation on the planet, and how most of that, I think she even said 2/3 of that is drug related, meaning drug possession plus drug business charges, and related charges to that. So, man, talk about progress and proving your point here. None of them guys, including Rand, none of them are libertarians, but they can't help but understand and adopt the wisdom of the libertarian argument this whole time, that the libertarians have been making this whole time. There's no way around it. They just can't ignore it anymore. That's all.
That is an absolutely incredible achievement. I mean, I didn't watch the debate, and that is phenomenal.
Believe me, overall, you're better off for your, psychological health and that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I get bored to death watching those things, but 25 years ago, when I started the Future of Freedom Foundation, I could light up every phone line on radio talk shows by calling for legalizing drugs because everybody was so outraged by the idea. And now 25 years later, you've got presidential candidates at the very least are not saying, let's lock up more people, let's crack down on the war on drugs, victory's around the corner. I mean, most of these people, if not all of them, are chameleons. They change their colors in accordance with what's going on out there in the electorate. If they get a sense that the country's moving toward drug legalization, they want to be changing their colors too. And so it's a phenomenal thing as far as I'm concerned that the country is now shifting. That shows you the power of ideas. Because let me tell you something, if the public opinion polls were showing the opposite, those guys would be saying crack down on the war on drugs. They're just responding to what we have done out here in the world of ideas. And they appear to be the leaders, up there on the stage and stuff, but actually they're just the followers. The real action is what you and I are doing right now, transmitting ideas on liberty. Can the same thing happen with respect to dismantling the warfare state, the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, the foreign bases, the domestic bases, the welfare state, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid? Absolutely. If these things came into existence when America didn't have them, America didn't have any of these things for more than 100 years. And somehow or another, the states were able to reach a critical mass that caused a shift. We could do it in the opposite direction. We cause a shift in the direction of liberty and prosperity and peace and harmony.
All right. So, yeah, the war thing, it goes without saying. This is what we talk about on my show every day, obviously, that kind of thing. So let me try to attack you from the left here a minute and say, come on, most Americans have democratically decided they like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. And without that, my daughter, my grandma, my uncle, whoever, their relation may be dead right now. You wouldn't believe the operation they paid for, that, or whatever, the syndrome that some loved one came down with. People paid in their whole lives and say, now I deserve my Social Security. Hell, you don't even get it till you turn 64. You're going to be dead in 5 years anyway. And, you barely even get any back anyway. And libertarians always want to cry and attack the welfare state, which at least Jacob has been sold as helping take care of people. Man, these are our friends and neighbors. And you know what? A lot of people, especially in a boom bust central bank economy like we have, it's just impossible to expect working people to be able to save up for their own retirement at 0% interest in their local savings account or in a stock market bubble where they're going to lose everything. And so if the government isn't picking up their pension, then, and their corporation that laid them off after 30 years sure as hell isn't, already screwed them out of it, then they're what, just going to lay down and die or what, Jacob? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I can sympathize with the argument because, I was a liberal leftist throughout my whole life until I discovered libertarianism in my late 20s. And I really bought into this leftist notion that the government should help people. And then one day it dawned on me when I was in an illegal alien detention center in South Texas. And I saw all these people walking around in this detention center that looked like a Nazi concentration camp with the guard towers and everything. That how could liberals purport to love the poor and the needy and the disadvantaged when they're doing to these people who are among the poorest people in the world? And that's when I realized that the welfare state has nothing to do with love for the poor and the needy. It's all about power and money and a misguided sense of helping people. That goes into this too. Franklin Roosevelt, who brought Social Security from really the Germans, that's where the idea came from. Bismarck got the idea from the German socialists. And so it got imported into the United States. The American people would have nothing to do with a program like this for 125 years or so. But Roosevelt was a genius, a political genius. He knew that if he could get all the seniors in the country on the dole, that he would have them. That he'd have them right where he wanted them. Because once you get somebody on the dole, then their mindset is, oh my gosh, I could never survive without the dole. I would have never made it without the dole. And the example you bring up is really good, like on the Medicare. Oh my gosh, if it hadn't been for Medicare, I would have never been able to live the rest of my life. I never would have gotten that operation. You hear with VA loans for college and stuff. I would have never gotten my college degree if it hadn't been for the VA and so forth. Well, because the government doesn't get its money except from one source, and that's from the citizenry. So, and that's what Henry Hazlitt's great message. What is unseen here? They're taking money from the young and the productive, and they're transferring it to the seniors. That the money that seniors supposedly, quote, put into the system, they don't put into anything. They just got taxed. It's just like any other tax. The government taxes you and spends the money. So today, there's no pool, there's no fund, there's no reserve that's going to this. They're just taxing young people. So when you say young people, they can say they're having trouble saving, they're having trouble starting out. Well, of course they are, because the government is plundering and looting up to such a large extent to fund the welfare state, including Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the warfare state. Ultimately, this thing's got to stop, because we can see the out-of-control spending. We can see Greece in the horizon. We know bankruptcies in the horizon. We know the out-of-control debt. We know that inflation, the debasement of the currency is taking place. Ultimately, some generations got to say, no, we got to stop this. And I say that should be our generations. We may not be able to get very many seniors to go along with this. They're on the dole. They're dependent on it. But we can get young people that are bearing the burden of this. We can get a lot of middle-class people, that 30s and 40s, middle-aged, that are saying, look, I'm willing to give it all up. If you pull all those people together, this is a representative democracy, and they vote to repeal Social Security, then it's gone, whether seniors object or not. And the same with Medicare and Medicaid. And so that's what I'm looking at. You reach this critical mass of people that can be less than a majority, then we convince the people that are kind of like on the margin, the young people and the middle-aged people, and all of a sudden we're outnumbering the seniors. And once you knock out Medicare and Social Security, then the ball's really going to start rolling, because now all those people say, well, if I'm not going to get my dole, I want to cut the dole out for everybody else, the foreign aid to dictators, the farm subsidies, the corporate bailouts, and all the rest of the socialist welfare.
Yeah. Now, one quick point here in the chat room, they said it was Fiorina's stepdaughter had overdosed on pills, painkiller pills, which, speaking of medical pot and all that, I'm sure you've seen the statistics out of Colorado where overdoses on heroin and prescription painkillers have gone down by, I think, 75% or something like that, since now it's easy for people to just smoke weed instead and take the edge off the pain in a way that is not risking their life like it is, of course, when you take opiates. You never know exactly what might happen. But anyway, I wanted to point out something.
Let me make a comment on that. Sure. That's very interesting, because, when you hear about drug overdoses, actually, most of the time they're not overdoses at all. That's what the government calls them. But actually, they're deaths from a corrupt mixture of drugs. Yeah. That people get heroin that's been mixed in with some kind of corrupting device, because the drug dealer has no ethics. He figures he can water down the drug, pollute it, make more money off it. He didn't care whether anybody dies. Nobody's going to get sued. You can't go to court for damages here for wrongful death. But all of a sudden you legalize drugs, and now the drug addict has a reputable company, a pharmaceutical, a pharmacist or whatever, that's providing his drugs. Now, we're not sitting here saying, hey, being addicted to heroin's a great thing. But for the heroin addict, we can have the sympathy for somebody that's addicted and saying, why shouldn't he get clean needles? Why shouldn't he be able to get the pure drug instead of the corrupted drug? So if you legalize drugs, the amount of people that die from, quote, drug overdoses would plummet, just like, as you point out, is happening in Colorado.
Yeah. Although at the same time, you take too many Oxycontin, your heart stops. That's it, So pot as a substitute for those kind of drugs, either way, is, I think a good recommendation. And the numbers since they legalized it in Colorado really show that. I'm not sure about the numbers from Washington State yet, if they have them. But people who were taking these dangerous pain medicines, even prescription or black market, but taking pain pills, decided, hey, if I can get away with having weed and not get in trouble for it, then I'd way rather do that, because it doesn't have that risk. You get, the only way to die from pot is to get shot by a cop. Everybody knows that. So once they legalize it, Cool. But hey, I wanted to go back to something you said about Bismarck and these, basically these Prussian militarist fascists inventing Social Security because they love everybody so much. I mean, in order to tie everybody's parents directly to the state, to the central state. I interviewed, it's been a long, long time, but I interviewed David Thoreau from the Independent Institute once. And I'm trying to remember if this is in New Deal or Raw Deal. By good old, what's his name there? Your friend of mine. What's his name that wrote New Deal or Raw Deal? FDR.
I'm
Anyway.
not sure.
The point is, when they came out, when they introduced the dole in the 1930s, according to Thoreau, you often hear the trope, and it's true, of course, that when you give welfare to single mothers, you are in effect paying them to be single mothers, and you will get more of them, just like subsidizing any other thing. Well, Thoreau said, well, wait, go back to the 30s. If you pay people to not have extended family, they will break off their extended family. And it wasn't World War II. It was the dole during the Great Depression before the war that encouraged people. They had to basically swear in the affidavit or whatever that they don't know their aunt, uncle, parents, grandparents, whoever extended family that they can rely on. It's just me, the wife, and the kids here, so I need to sign up for the thing. And this is what really led to the people cutting off their, I mean, obviously a more mobile America meant people moving easier anyway, but this is, was really the core, according to Thoreau, of the social engineering that created the nuclear family and destroyed the American extended family. And so then, it's just like the middle of the road leads to socialism, right? Everything they do is just a worse problem that requires more and more government intervention to full bankruptcy, I guess, at the end.
Yeah, that's Mises's principle, that one intervention leads to another intervention to fix the problems of the previous intervention until you end up with an omnipotent government.
It was Burton Folsom, by the way, was the name of the great author I was thinking of. Thank you very much, guest in the chat room there.
Yeah, I mean, this is the great African-American libertarian economist Walter Williams has written a lot about this, of how the welfare state just decimated poor African-American families, where they would encourage them, in a sense, to not get married because of the way the welfare system was structured. And then when you combine that with the minimum wage that has caused a chronic unemployment rate among African-American teenagers of like 30 or 40%, especially in the inner cities. And then you combine that with the war on drugs, where young blacks are tempted to make a big score with in the drug war, that you can see where this whole welfare state paternalistic society has really fallen disproportionately on the African-American community. I mean, it's been absolutely horrible. And then they put a lot of them into the penitentiaries. I mean, that's where the mass incarceration comes in large part. And it really is like the ideal segregation system, where they're taking African Americans out of the cities. They're not locating them within particular areas of the cities. They're just taking them out of the cities and putting them into the penitentiaries. And when they finally release them, they've lost voting rights. They can't get a job. They've got a felony conviction. I mean, it's just one great big racket, and it's so destructive.
Yeah. And, I was even reading earlier today about what they're legitimately calling the preschool to prison pipeline. I mean, you've heard of the school to prison pipeline. What great institutions these government schools are, providing fodder for the jails. And of course, again, being black is a great way to get, hauled off in handcuffs, compared to others. Not that others ought to be handcuffed in the same numbers, but obviously you see what I mean. But now, no, I mean, they literally have arrested small children, kindergarten age, and even younger for whatever supposed aggression against state officials. And it's just money. I mean, I'm sure you remember the judges was it Pennsylvania? I think 2 different judges, juvenile judges, who are just straight getting kickbacks in the most obvious way from the juvenile prison corporation that had the contract from the state to run the juvie prison. And you got kids in there for nothing, things that you couldn't even imagine could possibly be an offense. And this judge is putting them away for months or longer, just purely for his own direct gain, not even, for the rest of the crony, system that he's operating within, but for his own kickback. And anyway, I forgot my point. Something about just what a nightmare the system is that Americans still participate in. And you look at the kid in Dallas, where he brought his clock to school and they called the cops on him. The cops came and they took him away. And then when they got him there, they wouldn't let him call his dad or mom. They wouldn't let him call a lawyer. And they sat there, 4 detectives interrogating him. I mean, we're talking at this stage, Jacob, we're talking at least bare minimum 12 adult grown human beings going along with this. That this is our big moment. This is our big score. We caught a little Arab Muslim terrorist kid trying to do some terrorist thing. And until the very last minute when it gets called off, nope, you're the biggest idiots in the whole world this week. But before that, they were so excited that they caught this 14-year-old 9th grade kid, I don't know. Anyway.
No, it really is. I mean, it really goes to show you the idiocy of the whole thing. But here you have the confluence of another government program, which is the war on terrorism, where they go and bomb Muslim countries for I don't know how many years now. And before the bombing, they had the sanctions on Iraq that were killing hundreds of thousands of children there. And then they're shocked that when there's a Muslim that retaliates out of anger for what they've been killing all these people for. And then now you have this environment here in the United States. It's not only against the immigrant, where Hispanics bear the brunt of it. Not only do you have the war on drugs, where blacks are bearing the disproportionate effect of that paternalistic program. Then you got the war on terrorism, where you got to be terrified if you're a Muslim American in this country, because not only are the cops apt to do what they did to this kid, you've got private people, Scott, that are out there beating up people because they have a beard and the wrong kind of garb on or something. I mean, it just goes to show you what I was saying in the beginning, is that this thing is just one great big deadly destructive racket that means no freedom, no prosperity, no harmony. This is no place to live, no way to live. And what we've got to do is just keep plugging ahead with our vision of what a free society really is, because clearly this is not the ideal society. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah. Well, and this goes kind of back to what we're talking about here with, the American people and what's very broadly defined as the political left and the political right. And, as your friend and mine, Anthony Gregory, likes to say, the Democrats love government, Republicans hate liberty. So between the two of them are as stuck as us, but on the other hand, there really is the best of the left and the right. And there is some part of conservatism that understands that at the core, what they're trying to conserve is the classical liberalism of the founding era of the American Revolution and Constitution. And that's what they're standing athwart history trying to stop the destruction of, if they got their act together. There's and then possibly if they're religious enough and they take Jesus seriously enough, they believe in compassion for, the more powerless victims of the police state, although you don't get too much of that from the right. But then, on the left, the progressives, they can basically be fascists a lot of the time. But on the other hand, there's a lot of liberalism that is still, has embedded within it a core of the old liberalism that, it came from and got kind of perverted all along the way from. But so, the left, generally speaking, pretty good on the drug war, pretty good on individual liberties, pretty good on peace. I don't mean the actual Democrats in power, but I mean the people. And on the right, less so, but at least they're good on guns. Maybe you could get them to be good on taxes and some things. I'm not sure what else the right's good for, actually, but pseudo kind of capitalist. You could appeal to them if you could argue with them and make the case that they're a statist, and if they really believe in market capitalism, they'd have to be a libertarian like us. Maybe you could get bring some more right people. I know most libertarians actually come from the right, not the left, which is interesting to me. But anyway, there should be a lot to work with, since even though they never really meant it, I don't guess, the founders' slogans were all, and the American people's slogans since then have all been centered around liberty and freedom and justice and fairness and decency and these kinds of things. And we're not all white Protestants, and we're not all, Chinese immigrants, and we're not all, one kind of religion or ethnicity or whatever, but we all believe in liberty, or at least we all pretend to say we do. So it seems like that's a lot that we could be able to work with, Jacob, if we do it right.
I couldn't agree with you more. And when you look at the left, they do some fantastic articles and speeches on the drug war, on civil liberties, on the empire, the military empire, the national security state. I mean, we work with them in our conferences where, we've had Glenn Greenwald and Jonathan Turley and Daniel Ellsberg and lots of other liberals. We always keep them talking about, these particular issues. And you're right, on the right. I mean, conservatives can be good. They're not always very good, but they can be good on free markets and genuine free enterprise. At least some of them, the old idea of classical liberalism. And so we can reach critical masses on segments of the government. Like if we reached a critical mass to dismantle the warfare state, that'd be fantastic, even if we don't yet have that critical mass on the welfare state. That would be a tremendous improvement. And I wanted to say one more thing on your point about Bismarck. This is really funny. A lot of people, I think, would be shocked to know this, but on the website of the Social Security Administration is a bust of Bismarck.
No way, really?
Absolutely. It's not.
They don't even get it.
They don't get it at all. They're like praising, like he's the father of Social Security. But little do they know, or maybe they do know, that Bismarck got the idea from the German socialists. So because he co-opted them, he said, okay, they're getting popular, so I'm going to take their idea. And of course, Germany gave us much more than that: national health care, Medicare and Medicaid, public schooling. A lot of people don't realize that. These are all things, Scott, that America rejected. For over 100 years, they rejected this stuff, including the income tax and the IRS and the Federal Reserve. That should give us hope. We have this heritage. And if you look at like Grover Cleveland, a Democrat, Google his veto message on the Texas Farm Bill. And he vetoed a $10,000 grant to Texas farmers who were suffering a drought. And in that veto message, he says, it is not the duty of government to support the citizenry. That's a Democrat. That's what Democrats used to stand for. And so I agree with you. If Democrats can get rid of this sense that government should be helping people and instead leave charity in the private sector, we're talking about some major revolutionary change toward the heritage of liberty in which the country was meant to be.
Yeah. Well, and one other issue here that we've talked about, and that is being solved along these lines by voluntary means every day, is in education, where people are just pulling their kids out of school, on a regular basis, and not because they are a certain religious sect or have a certain set of politics, but just, geez, my kid came home from school and doesn't know A from Z. And so why am I even sending him there? And they're pulling their kids right out of school. And in fact, I think thanks to the religious homeschoolers, there are powerful organized homeschool lobbies who will be damned if they're going to let any state legislature stand in their way of doing what they want. And I think that's pretty much, across the country right now. There was actually one great victory where in California, they tried to say you have to have a license to homeschool a teacher certificate, basically, to homeschool your own kids. And they just said, really? Because if I'm not homeschooling my kid, I'm not going to have anything to do except stay home all day, making sure you're never a politician again. So go ahead and choose how you want to vote on this. And they won on it. The homeschoolers did. That was a long time ago now. And so that's the kind of thing where, it serves as a great example to people too, where they may not be ideological at all, but they're just proving the case that, government service is terrible, high prices, low quality, same as any other monopoly.
Well, I always got amused over the state's objection to the homeschooling movement when it was getting started, because they were saying parents are not competent to educate their children. And my question was, well, why not? Aren't all these parents graduates of public schools? And so if they're not competent after going through the public school system, why do we want to keep repeating this pattern? And, you know, if public schooling was a neutral process, you know, I could sit there and say, well, okay, parents should have a choice, and if that's what they choose to do. But it really isn't a neutral process. Public schooling really does do affirmative harm to a child's mind and to his spirit, to his sense of self-esteem. I mean, it's not a coincidence, in my opinion, that you've got all these children that are, you know, having to take Ritalin and Adderall and stuff. To me, they're the healthy ones. They're the ones that are saying, I don't like this system. And yet the state calls them into the psychologist's office, the therapist's office, and says to the parents, something's obviously wrong with your kid. He's rebelling against the state system. The parent doesn't know any better. He's a graduate of public schools. He defers to authority. So they put their kids on Ritalin and Adderall, which is the very worst thing. They ought to be taking their kids out of that system. And really the best thing to do is just abolish the whole system, a total free market in education. Yeah. I mean, where do you think we get all these statists from? I mean, the indoctrination starts in the first grade, and it continues on for this 12-year sentence. And that's what I call it. It's a 12-year sentence.
Yeah, absolutely. If they teach you any history at all, it's the history of the greatness of our government ever since the great day it was created and all the great things that it's done. And one time it messed up, but then half of it killed the other half and made it surrender. And then everything was all right again. And then everything's just been democracy and apple pie since then. Everybody loves it. And that's certainly the case that I learned in school.
Yeah, that the Social Security helps you and benefits you, and it's all freedom. You see, this is the whole welfare warfare state is freedom.
And it wouldn't be this way if the wise people of American history hadn't decided through their democratic process to make it this way. And so how could you possibly object?
Exactly.
It is what it is because it is what it is.
Now, that's why I love that Johann Goethe quote. It's my favorite quote of all libertarianism, where he says, none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's why I like talking to you and doing this show, because honestly, when I sit here and listen to you talk about this stuff, I can absolutely just very easily imagine, you know, I Dream of Jeannie comes and just abolishes the American state, you know, in its every detail, and then it's fine. And I don't mean like in a utopian kind of, you know, crazy way, everybody's just rubbing butts in fields of flowers and whatever, but the biggest source of discord and disruption in our society, violence, and resentment in our society, gone. Let people trade. Let them educate themselves and each other at the market price. Let them protect each other at the market rate. And who needs these goons at all? And it's funny because, I mean, the starting off point for the rest of society is, boy, is the burden on you to make the case for freedom. But when I hear you make the case for freedom, I just think, no, man, I don't think so. I need someone to make a serious case for why we need these guys, because, you know, obviously they're just butting in. As you said, even when they're at their most charitable, it's just a scam to make you love them so they can get away with worse things and to make you believe that you wouldn't have been able to possibly find another way if it hadn't have been for them, which is, of course, a scam.
Oh, it's a big money-making racket. It's the warfare racket and the welfare racket. And it's been going on a long time. People are making a killing off it in the quote, defense industry, in the welfare industry. I mean, I think Walter Williams calls them poverty pimps, the people that are making money off the system. Yeah, it's just a horrible, destructive system. I know, you know, we had the first show, we talked about minarchy and anarchy, and I know there's a difference in the movement on that. You know where I stand on minarchy, but if you go, people tell us, oh, this is not possible, pie in the sky, idealistic, utopian. Well, if you go to, let's say, 1890, which is one of my favorite periods as far as the quote, the free society, I'm not saying it was a perfectly libertarian society. We all know it wasn't. You had the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. You had corporatism, land grants to the railroads. But let's see what you didn't have. just to answer the ones that accuse us of utopia. No Social Security, no IRS, no income tax, no gun control, no drug laws, no occupational licensure, no minimum wage laws, no immigration controls,
no draft,
no Social Security, no draft, no standing army. They had a little basic military force, but no empire, no Pentagon, no CIA, no NSA, no torture, no program of assassinations. I could live in that kind of society, and yeah, okay, they had a post office and they had these other things I mentioned, but man, this to me was an exciting period. Inventions, excitement, dynamism, standards of living were soaring. That had to be a very exciting place in which to live.
Well, yeah, and look, right now we're living under the biggest government in the history of the solar system. So your minarchy is a 99.999% reduction from where we are now. I think I'd take it. We could argue when we get there about which way to turn. But anyway, listen, we're over and we're at risk of discussing everything we plan to discuss for the rest of the history of this show, and we don't want to do that. So thank you very much for doing this again with me here, Jacob.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure. Thanks for doing it with me. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody, and that's it. It's the Future of Freedom. I'm Scott Horton. I'm the editor of antiwar.com, and I do a radio show. You can find me at scotthorton.org. And he is Jacob Hornberger, the founder and the president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Thanks again, Jacob.
Thank you, Scott. Bye-bye.
I read so much I can't keep it all straight. I think you even say yourself, it's freedom itself that is. Oh, no, it's Jeffrey Tucker's article that you linked to in your other piece. That it just terrifies people. The idea that somebody else is doing something, the first thing they think is they're going to do something to harm me. Everybody's entire will must be, completely layered in prior restraint, or else what might happen? And that's left, right, and everybody who's just not political. They think an opinion means something that the government ought to make someone do. Otherwise, what's the point of having an opinion if it's not what you think the government should make people, how you think the government should make people behave? And so I wonder, what to do about that. I mean, obviously, you've got your foundation, you do your writing, you bring together these great libertarian minds. Politically speaking, we're stuck with Rand Paul at best. So we're basically doomed there, certainly on the national level. What's the libertarian to do to try to make a more libertarian society when our countrymen just don't agree with us? They really just don't.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. It goes really to methodology. Do we have it? This is really not the kind of society that people deep down, I think, really want. It's not a free society by any means. It's not a harmonious, peaceful, prosperous society. It's a very violent, kind of a police state, welfare, warfare state society. Now, we libertarians, so we challenge people then, like, what kind of society do you want? And then once you decide you want that kind of society, well, is it possible to achieve? Because, you put it well. A lot of people say, I want to be taken care of by the government. I want the government to manage my life. I want the government to handle all the resources in the country and redistribute them. I want the government to keep me safe with a giant military establishment, overseas military bases, killing, bombing people on an indefinite basis. Well, so then how do we prevail? Well, I've come to the conclusion that the secret to this is just to reach a critical mass of people who want the genuine free society. This is the way you change corporations. You keep working to influence changes in mindset in corporations. You reach a critical mass. Chance, is it possible to achieve the free society rightly understood? And I say yes. The answer is to all of those. And the reason that I raised that question in the article you're referring to is that I think it's time for people to sit back and reflect, regular people. I mean, libertarians already know that we want a society of peace, prosperity, harmony, freedom. But I think it's important for people, non-libertarians, to reflect really deeply, what kind of society do you want? Because, I mean, look at the kind of society we're living in. We're living in a very violent society. I don't think anybody can deny that. You've got government killing people on a daily basis, especially in the Middle East. You've got a huge welfare state that gobbles up an enormous amount of productive capital. You've got everybody trying to get into everybody else's pocketbook, but every April 15th trying to take as many deductions and tax credits to protect his own money from being plundered and looted. You've got a drug addiction problem that clearly is serious enough to manifest a continuation of the war on drugs. So,
all right, welcome everybody to the Future Freedom. I'm your host, Scott Horton, and he is my perpetual guest here every Thursday night. It's Jacob Hornberger, founder and president of the Libertarian Future of Freedom Foundation. This is our show, The Future of Freedom. Hi, Jacob. Welcome.
Good to be back, Scott. Ready for another round.
Good, good. Very happy to have you here. I really like the way you write. I've been reading you for a long, long time here, and you got a lot of good stuff. I want to start with this one. What kind of society do you want, and how do you get it? And I want to start with just the first part, because you describe what seems like, ought to be just whatever would be the rote answer for any normal human being. Peace and security and prosperity and freedom, right? Or who could argue with that? That's what everybody wants. And yet, the more I was reading your article, the more it was, really dawning on me what I already knew, but it's really hitting me hard that this is not what people want. This is what people say, but it's, freedom itself. I think, is that you that?
Mass of those people, and that could be less than a majority. It could be like 20%, 25%, and the whole corporation then just shifts. That's what can happen with a monumental change in society. You keep building up this tiny minority of the purists, the people that really want freedom, and then the society shifts. You can't predict how it's going to shift. All you know is that here is the prerequisite for shifting. You've got to reach that critical mass. So I don't really concern myself with the fact that the Hillary Clintons and the Donald Trumps of the world don't buy into libertarianism. We don't have to convince them. We have to just keep finding the people that keep building our particular critical mass, and then things are going to shift. A good example of this phenomenon is the drug war. I mean, we're getting very close to bringing this thing down. I think we're closer than we've ever been. I mean, you can hardly open up a newspaper or the internet without seeing an op-ed saying legalize drugs. But notice that none of the presidential candidates are talking about it. It's certainly not being brought up in the debates. But gradually, this thing's going to reach a tsunami level with this critical mass of people that I think is going to cause them to legalize.